Hey, I just wanted to make a quick video. Many people have, since I've been posting these videos, some family members have asked me to keep doing them, and I hate them, but I think it's important to get the truth out and to speak to Americans out there and let them know what is going on in our country. The media refuses to do it and refuses to speak the truth, and so as an American, I believe it's important that we do that. Many people have asked me how I have gotten involved in everything going on and involved with the trial that's going on in Oregon and the Bundy family. And I wanted to share a little bit about my story and also about the truth and the lies that are being told. In 2009, well, actually a couple of years before 2009, there was an informant who was hired by the name of Ted Gardner. And he was paid, first of all, he's an ex-con alcoholic, drug addict. When they found him, when they found him to offer him the job, he was actually living in the mountains. And he was pretty much homeless, and they offered him this opportunity to be involved in a raid that they were hopefully wanting to set up. So his name is Ted Gardner, and there were several people involved in hiring him, but two of the main people that several people know who they are, and they have also been involved in what's going on in Oregon and at the Bundy Ranch in Nevada. The head FBI agent that was in charge of hiring Ted Gardner and in charge of this raid that involved my extended family and my uncle, his name is Greg Bretzing. So Greg Bretzing was involved in hiring Ted Gardner in Blanding, Utah, this raid that went on in 2009. And he also was the head FBI agent in charge most recently in Oregon. And then also the other person involved and in charge was a BLM agent by the name of Dan Love. So he and Greg Bretzing set up this operation. They called it Operation Cerebrus in Blanding, Utah. And they hired this informant named Ted Gardner. Dan Love was also the head BLM agent in charge at the Bundy Ranch in Bunkerville. So in 2009, they told Ted Gardner that they wanted him to try to get my uncle, Dr. Red, to sell him an Indian artifact. So for 2 years prior to the raid that was set up, he consistently went to my uncle's home and developed a relationship with him and my extended family, and he tried to get him to sell him an Indian artifact, which is illegal. Illegal when it's picked up off of public land. And there's some discrepancies with that. It became illegal at a certain year. So to try to determine what artifacts are legal and what artifacts are not, anyways, there's a lot that goes into it. It's legal if it's private land. So he continued to go to my extended family's home. They developed a relationship. They're great, loving people, and they invited him into their home. They took him in as their own. They invited him to church. He at one time had something going on with his knee or his ankle. I can't remember which one it was. My uncle, being a doctor, he helped him and fixed it for free, and they developed. That's how my family is. They're good people. They love people. They love to help. And with Ted, it was no different. They invited him into their home, not knowing what his goal and his point in being there was. But through all these visits, he had a little, on the button of his shirt, he had a camera. And he would go into their home and speak with them, and the whole time it was being recorded. Throughout the course of 2 years, Ted Gardner was paid $225,000 to be involved in this. And he wasn't able to get my uncle to sell him anything, but in the course of this relationship and these conversations, my uncle mentioned that he had picked a little tiny, they call it a bird pendant. It was a little tiny bead off the surface of the ground. And when I say tiny, it is tiny. I actually have a picture here. I'll try to show it to you. So that is the bead that he picked up off the surface of the ground. And so in their conversation, he mentioned that. And because he wouldn't sell anything, they decided to raise the value of that, the price value of that bead to $1,000. And then at that point, they were able to legally set up the raid. So at this raid that Dan Love and Greg Bretzing put together, there were about 140 FBI agents at my extended family's home. There were snipers on the roof. Keep in mind, my uncle has had no criminal history. No criminal history. He had been the doctor in the town for over 30 years. Many people knew him. He was a good person and had saved many lives. And there was no need. The thing through all of this that I have struggled with is why the over-aggressive military-like actions. Why is that necessary? Why is our federal government using tactics and forces on people who have no criminal? They don't even use it on people that murder people. What is being exposed, or what are they feeling so threatened about, where they are setting up these over-aggressive military-like tactics? With my uncle, so the excuse with the people in Oregon is that they knew that they were armed. They knew that they had weapons, and so they used that as the excuse. What's the excuse with my uncle? He didn't carry a gun on his hip. He wasn't armed. He wasn't a dangerous person. What's the excuse for him? Through all of this, that has been my biggest concern. Why these military-like tactics on people with no criminal history? Why, as Americans, are we spending money, our money, on operations like this? If they did something wrong, if they truly believe that they did something wrong, what happened to just going in and arresting them? Sending in a police officer to arrest them? It blows my mind. It doesn't make any sense to me. It makes me realize that there's a bigger picture. There's something more going on, and they feel threatened. They feel threatened and determined to silence people and to stop whatever is being exposed. So back to the raid. They raided my uncle's home. They shackled and handcuffed him, my aunt, and my cousin, and they took my uncle into the garage and interrogated him for 4 hours and told him that he would never practice again, that my aunt and that his wife and daughter would spend the rest of their life in prison and never see the light of day again. And just horrible, horrible, unnecessary things. And after the 4 hours of interrogation, they took them all and took them down to jail. The interesting part about this is it wasn't about the bead. It wasn't about the bead or the bird pendant, because they didn't even take it with them. They forgot to take the whole purpose and reason for this raid was about this bead and this bird pendant, and they didn't even take it with them. They didn't take it with them, and so my extended family was able to have that bead appraised, and it was appraised at like $50 to $75. So the federal government inflated the price from $50 to $75 to $1,000, which would reach the felony threshold mark and allow them to set up this raid. So it wasn't about the bead or the bird pendant. They left it there. They didn't even take it with them. It wasn't until a month or so later they realized, oh crap, we don't have we don't have it. We should probably go get it. So they went back to retrieve it. So this is what happened with my family. It was in 2009. That is when I began to wake up. That is when I began to realize that our government maybe isn't there to protect us. As Americans, we rely on them. We're supposed to rely on them to protect us from foreign enemies and from harm. And these are this is the very same group that we should probably be afraid of. That we should probably stand united together peacefully to expose them and stop the corruption that's going on and the unnecessary military-like tactics that are going on to good people, good-hearted people. In 2009, I began to wake up. And I began to realize the corruption and the tyranny that exists. And it was scary. It was scary for me. And I've never been involved in any of this before because it is scary. It's scary to think what's really going on out there and what exists out there. A little over a year ago, Ammon and Lisa Bundy moved into our town. And we, by no miracle, happened to meet and became family friends. Lisa is like a sister to me. Just an amazing family. We quickly became best friends, and I love them as my own. And so January 2nd, as many people know, Ammon and a group of other people decided to go to a refuge in Oregon. They decided to take a peaceful stand. Ammon had spent, I was witness to it, he spent months and months trying to get elected officials to listen. There's a family, the Hammond family in Oregon, who had supposedly started a fire. But I mean, keep in mind, so in this town in Burns, there is property all around the Hammond family's property. And when you own property, you have to pay the federal government taxes every year. And these families that owned property around the Hammond family, the taxes were raised to such a rate that they gradually weren't able to own their property anymore because they weren't able to pay their taxes. So the federal government gradually started buying land all around the Hammond family. and now they own that land all around there. The Hammond family kept paying their taxes, and tried to keep up. They didn't want to lose their land that had been in their family forever. And so eventually, all of a sudden, they are being charged for a fire that supposedly they started. It was a backfire. There's proof and evidence that the fire actually helped the land. And, you know, the BLM starts fires and ruins property and land all the time. They're never prosecuted. But this Hammond family, they served time in jail. They went to trial. The judge sent them to jail. They served their time, and then a short while later, another judge came in and said, actually, you didn't serve enough time. There's a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence that needs to be served. So they actually were sent back to prison. And when Ammon heard about this, he could relate. See, when the corruption and the tyranny doesn't affect you or your family directly, it's hard to understand. It's hard to get it. When it does affect your family personally and you personally, you get it. And when you hear these stories, you want to help. Ammon was taught at a young age that we serve our neighbors, we help our neighbors. He heard about the Hammond family, what they were going through, and he knew it was wrong. He knew what was really going on. He knew the big picture. And he spent months trying to get the elected officials to listen. What are we as Americans supposed to do when we go through our elected officials to try to resolve a concern and they're ignored or mocked? What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to just allow it? Are we supposed to just sit back and watch? Ammon did this for months. For months before January 2nd, sorry, my dogs are going crazy. For months, he tried to take the prudent measures and go through the elected officials to help the Hammonds. Everything was ignored or mocked. And at that point, he felt, he didn't want to, but he felt it necessary to take, as they have been calling it in court, a hard stand. It wasn't a dangerous stand. They didn't go in there they didn't hold guns to anybody. The only people that pointed any guns at anybody or killed anybody was the FBI. They were allowed to come and go. They traveled all over. They were educating Americans about our rights, and so there's a law called adverse possession, and if there's a disagreement on who owns the land, you can go in and claim the land and occupy the land and maintain the land, and that's what they did. He and a group of people went into the refuge. The doors were open. The heat was on. They went into the refuge. They cleaned it up. They maintained it. They tried to change the utilities into their name so that they could pay the utility bill. They did upgrades. They changed the name. They were claiming this property and this land. Now, through adverse possession, when you go in and claim if there's a dispute on some land and you go in and claim it, if the other party has a problem with that, they, first of all, are supposed to file a trespassing charge, and then also an eviction notice. That's how it works. And Ammon was hoping that would happen. He was hoping that would happen so that they could go to court and dispute who owns this refuge? Who owns the land in Burns? This little town in Burns used to be the highest. I mean, these people used to do really, really well and succeed. And now, because of the government coming in and taking over the farms, and they have left these people desolate here in this town of Burns. So Ammon was hoping. He was hoping that someone would file a trespassing charge. He was hoping that he could go into a regular court not owned by the same people that are disputing whose land it is. He was hoping that they could dispute who really owns it and get down to the bottom of the corruption and the tyranny that's going on. That was his goal. The federal government has painted a totally different picture. Way inaccurate from the truth. In trial the other day, when the prosecution put their witnesses on the stand, it all surrounded against these pictures of these supposedly scary looking men holding these big huge guns, and they wanted people to think that this was Ammon and this was the type of people at the refuge. Not that the pictures of those people, that those are bad people, but it was about the picture that they were creating and wanting to paint. And the prosecution set up almost their whole defense over these pictures and how these are scary, dangerous criminals. And when the defense took the stand and put their witnesses on the stand, it came out that these pictures, these were people that never even spent one day at the refuge. Not one day at the refuge. They were there as security detail for someone, Brandon Rapola, that is part of the PPN network, and he was speaking to the media. So he brought them with him to be his security, to protect him. And it was his idea. They were his people, and they never spent one night or one day at the refuge. They were there for maybe like 15 minutes, I think is what Brandon said. So, I mean, it's all about lies, deceit, silence. I mean, what is the real purpose? What is the real purpose? You have LaVoy Finicum shot and killed. This was a person who people listened to. He was well known. He was a good speaker. And in the media, right after the killing of LaVoy, the Sheriff Ward spoke to the media. And I don't know if he didn't think that this video would come out later. At this point, the drone video hadn't come out, but Sheriff Ward said that he was saddened that a regular traffic stop had turned deadly. I don't know about you guys, but when have you ever been pulled over in a regular traffic stop? When have you ever been pulled over by a convoy of about 40 people with snipers in the trees, and before you're even asked to show picture ID and registration, you have guns pointed at you? A regular traffic stop. That's what Sheriff Ward said. When I've never had that happen. And that's what they were claiming. And then they hire someone who, by the way, from the very beginning of this, has been harassing me, attacking me, slandering me. And recently we found out that he's been being paid by the federal government. So he's paid by the federal government to set up the narrative. Right after this traffic stop, he was one of the only ones released, and he makes a video. he makes a video that is shared all over by the media everywhere saying that LaVoy charged the officers. And the point of that, I'm sure, is to set up the narrative. Before anybody else, everyone else is silenced, and he is released and allowed to set up the narrative of lies and deceit. LaVoy didn't charge anybody. I was there at the point where he was murdered and killed shortly after it happened. The snow, you could still see the prints, the footprints, the tire tracks. I walked alongside where these were visible. The snow went almost to my knees. And this wasn't a light, fluffy snow like in Utah. This was a hard, icy snow. My foot sank all the way to the bottom, and when I pulled it out, my shoe came off. He was at a total disadvantage. Down below where the FBI was, it was plowed, it was level to the ground. Up above, where the snipers were and the other FBI or OSP officers were, also it was plowed, and they didn't have that problem. LaVoy was not rushing. It's not possible. I'm probably taller than he is. He's a little short, small guy. There's no way, with the conditions that existed, there's no way he was charging anybody. But our federal government hires someone to not only attack and harass and threaten people to the point that they are silenced, or that was the goal. Sorry, I kind of have a big mouth. I'm hard to silence. But I mean, obviously that was the goal, is to harass people that they're scared enough to be quiet, and then also pay this person to set up good people. He knows what a good person. He told me over and over himself, this informant, said Ammon doesn't deserve to be where he's at. Ammon's a good person. He said Ammon has a good heart. He told me that over and over on the phone after this happened. And he said Ammon was set up. That an informant, an employee of the federal government. Those were the words that came out of his mouth. So he started the narrative, and everyone else was silenced. LaVoy Finicum was silenced. And then we have, just recently, Shailene. She's the actress from Divergent. She's out in North Dakota peacefully protesting with thousands of people. Thousands of people. And just a few days ago, she gets arrested. She's singled out and she gets arrested. Why? What about all the other people? Why single her out? She has about 40,000 people that are following her and listening to her and supporting her. She's making a difference. People are listening. She's exposing the corruption. They want to silence her. She's a threat to them. LaVoy was a threat to the federal government. LaVoy wasn't a threat to me. He wasn't a threat to any American. Since when does defending the Constitution characterize you as a terrorist, as a horrible, dangerous person? Did you know that his truck, his wife Jeanette, still to this day has not been granted access to his truck? I mean, at this point, you can count it as tampered evidence. They could have, by this point, they could have redone the whole truck. If you have nothing to hide, why not put out the truth? Why not let everyone see all your evidence? Why, when FBI agents were asked if they fired shots during the murder of LaVoy, 3 times FBI agents lied and said, no, we did not. 3 times. 3 times they lied. And then they were caught on camera trying to cover evidence and picking up shell casings. And now the federal government is investigating themselves to see if there's any criminal wrongdoing. How would it be if we got to investigate ourselves? That would be great. They're investigating themselves to see if there was any wrongdoing. Well, obviously there was. If 3 times federal agents lied and said, no, we did not fire shots, and then later it's found out that they did, why lie? Why the lies and deceit and the cover-ups? If you're telling the truth, why not show all the evidence? Why not be truthful and put it out there to support your story? Even the tow truck driver, so the truck Jeanette hasn't been able to see it. The tow truck driver was put under a gag order, so he can't even talk about the truck. The murder of LaVoy Finicum can't even be brought up at trial. Which, to me, that's the most important part of this all. We can't trust our federal government, that we're scared of them, that they're full of lies, deceit, and cover-ups, and they hire informants and pay them all this, endless amounts of money to hire people to set up good American people. What could we do if we had endless amounts of money? What could we pay people to do and say? The options would be endless. And this is what our federal government is doing. This is what they're doing. January 7th, Ammon Bundy met with Sheriff Ward. Sheriff Ward shook Ammon Bundy's hand January 7th. And then January 19th, a bunch of people from the refuge went down into Burns and attended a community meeting, and nobody arrested them. Nobody. They were allowed to go to the community meeting. They were allowed to sit there and they weren't allowed to participate. The mic was never given to them, but they were allowed to go. They sat there. Nobody arrested them. Nothing happened. January 21st, they went down to the FBI compound, and there's pictures on the internet of the FBI shaking hands with Ammon Bundy. That was January 21st. January 22nd, again, Ammon Bundy's down at the FBI compound, shaking hands with the FBI. They didn't arrest him. They shook his hand. January 22nd. The ambush and the killing and murder of LaVoy Finicum happened on the 26th. The 22nd, the FBI was shaking hands with these people, knowing that they were setting up a death trap and an ambush to kill every single one of them. And instead of arresting them, they shook their hand. And people were like, well, they probably didn't want the Burns residents to be harmed. The FBI compound was all the way out at the airport. There was nobody. It would have been the perfect place to arrest them. Nobody around, far enough outside of town where there's no excuse. January 22nd, the FBI negotiator wouldn't negotiate with Ammon Bundy to develop a peaceful resolve because Ammon wanted to record it. He wanted it all documented and recorded. And the FBI negotiator would not negotiate with him on the 22nd because he didn't want it recorded. Why all the lies, deceit, and cover-up? If you're telling the truth and you're doing what's right, what's wrong with recording it? What's wrong with letting people see that you're there to make sure there's a peaceful resolution and a peaceful ending? January 22nd, Ammon also went to try to speak to Sheriff Ward. He went down to the police station, and what was he told? He was told that Sheriff Ward was unavailable. That he was unavailable and that he could not speak with them. January 22nd. This is the truth. This is what really happened. This is what really went on. The media refuses to tell the truth. The federal government refuses to tell the truth. They haven't allowed LaVoy's murder. The judge ruled that LaVoy's murder could not be talked about or presented whatsoever in court, which to me is really important. That's the most important thing about this. Supposedly, Ryan Bundy had a gun right under his foot when they were being shot at by the FBI. According to the FBI's report, which, I mean, they lied 3 times saying they never shot, so what can you believe? But according to the OSP and FBI report, Ryan Bundy had a gun right under his foot. And you watch the video, and that would have been a perfect opportunity to pick up the gun and shoot back in self-defense. It was right there. He would have he probably wouldn't have even had to reach down. It was right there at his access, and not one person in that truck picked up a gun and pointed it on anybody. And the charges are impeding a federal officer through threat, intimidation, and harm or something like that. That right there is a perfect example that these people did not want anything but peaceful resolution. They're not dangerous, angry, harmful people. There was a gun right under his foot, and he didn't even pick it up and fire back in self-defense when they were being shot at. But yet that part can't be included in the trial. That's how it works. LaVoy can't be mentioned in trial. The murder and the investigation cannot be mentioned in trial. The narrative has been controlled and set up by the judge in trial. The truth hasn't been able to come out. There's just so many lies and so much deceit. The media, when it was reporting anything, reported that the schools in Burns were shut down because people were scared. The truth was the school was shut down because they needed somewhere to house all the FBI agents and all their equipment. That was the truth. The media wasn't reporting that. They were reporting the lies and the deceit and the cover-ups. So back to, I kind of got off Shailene, but so she's arrested, she's silenced, LaVoy was silenced. Then you have the Bundys. Ammon Bundy has no criminal history. In the police report, it says he was so compliant, he was almost friendly. No criminal history, almost friendly when he's being shot at. And, well, I guess he was in Mark's Jeep, so he wasn't being shot at. But when he's surrounded by snipers and lasers with red dots all over him, he's almost friendly. And yet he hasn't, first of all, he was in solitary confinement, segregation. They only got out for, I think it was like 4 hours a day when they were first arrested. He's so dangerous that he has to be placed in solitary for much longer than someone who goes out and kills people. Is it that he's dangerous, or is it that they want him silenced? I think it's that they want him silenced. These people that were arrested in the Nevada with the Bunkerville charges. Clive Bundy flew out to Portland, and they wanted, in my opinion, they wanted to arrest him. They wanted to silence him. He's not a dangerous person. He's not a criminal. They wanted to silence him. They wanted to silence the Bundys. And the only way to do that, because the Bundys refused to stand down and stand by and watch corruption and tyranny take place. They refuse to watch their neighbor being abused and sit there and do nothing. They refuse to do that. The federal government wants the Bundys silenced because they're exposing them. When Cliven flew to Portland, the perfect opportunity to go in and arrest him. People don't fly with he wasn't with anybody. He wasn't armed. People don't fly with weapons. Perfect time to arrest him. So they arrest him, but, well, what can we charge him with? Oh, let's charge him with the Bunkerville charges. And because we're charging him and arresting him, we should probably arrest a few other people just to make it not look so obvious. So these guys are in Nevada. Everything's been sealed, so nobody can see what's being said. Nobody's being allowed to see what the charges are or what's being brought against them. Everything's sealed. It's all about secrecy and silence. They're over there in Nevada, and none of them, not one single person, has been granted pretrial release. And these are people that for 2 years have been roaming wherever they wanted. Guess how many people have died or have been hurt in those 2 years that all of these men who are being jailed over there with no pre-trial release, guess how many people have died or been harmed by them in the last 2 years when they've been able to just walk around free? 0. In fact, I've seen pictures of many of them helping in the community. For 2 years, Bunkerville happened in 2014. For 2 years, every single one of them have been able to roam free. But now, all of a sudden, they're so dangerous they can't even get out on pretrial release. And the judge schedules the court for next year so they can just hold them and make him sit there till next year. So dangerous, they have to sit there now all of a sudden. But the last 2 years, they were fine. And I mean, talk about Davy Bundy. At Bunkerville, he was arrested. He took out his camera and wanted to take pictures. Heaven forbid we document or record anything, right? He took out his camera, and wanted to take pictures. And he was beat up. There's pictures on the internet. Go find him. Beat up on his face. Arrested because he wanted the truth to be shown in pictures. That's why. He was arrested. He was taken down to the jail in 2014. Shortly after, he was given a sack lunch and released. So this dangerous criminal that can't be released now on pretrial release, back then when it actually happened, he wasn't even held for 24 hours. He was given a sack lunch and sent on his way. But now, all of a sudden, 2 years later, for the same exact incident, he's dangerous, and he needs to be re-arrested and recharged and not granted pretrial release. He wasn't that dangerous then when it happened. 2 years later, he is. I mean, none of it makes sense. But the problem is, as Americans, we sit back idle. We don't look into these things. We don't look for the truth. We don't want to be involved. People are like, I hear people all this time say, well, I'm not a rancher. I don't own land. I'm not a Bundy. I'll be okay. I promise you, you will not be okay. I promise you there will be a time when the corruption and the tyranny will affect you and your family. My family's, we're not ranchers. My uncle wasn't a rancher. My uncle's not a Bundy. My uncle was a doctor. He was a doctor, and the same people involved in the corruption and the tyranny that is going on now, Dan Love and Greg Bretzing, they were the same people involved back then. My uncle's not a rancher. He's a doctor. And it arrived at our doorstep. I promise you, if we do not educate ourselves and get involved, whether we want to or not, and peacefully stand together, the corruption and the tyranny will affect you, no matter who you are. No matter your occupation, your title, your race, it doesn't matter. It will arrive at your doorstep if we do not stand together united as Americans. One other thing too that was interesting that I woke up to. So with Dan Love, he's the BLM agent that was in charge of the raid that was set up with my uncle, and he's also the BLM agent that was in charge at Bunkerville in 2014. My extended family filed a wrongful death lawsuit. So my uncle, the day after he was arrested, I can't remember if I told this part, the day after he was interrogated and arrested in the manner that he was, he really felt like he was the one they were targeting. He felt like if he could take himself out of the equation, that his family would be saved. And so the day they released him, he ended up taking his own life. And he was right. After he took his life, the informant felt so bad for being involved in such corruption that Ted Gardner shot himself in the head. So before trial, the informant that was supposed to, that was the main person with all the supposed evidence, shot himself in the head before trial. And then one other person committed suicide as well. The whole case unraveled. The whole thing fell apart before trial even took place. Nobody served any jail time. Well, I take that back. One person served jail time. It was a man who said out loud that he wanted to hurt the informant. He didn't say he wanted to kill him. He said out loud that he wanted to hurt the informant. And because of that, he was looking at like 25 years in prison, and he ended up serving a year. He was the only one that served jail time. So you would think, oh wow, maybe they realized that they were in the wrong. Maybe they apologized. No, nobody apologized. In fact, Dan Love was promoted. There was a big article written about him for what? For 3 deaths. He was promoted and congratulated, and anyways, my extended family did this wrongful death lawsuit, and it ended up that the judge ended up dismissing the case. And the reason for that was that Dan Love, because he works for the federal government, and I know there's disputes out there about the BLM not being part of the government, but according to the judge, because he works for the federal government, he is covered by qualified immunity. For those of you that don't know what qualified immunity is, basically it means that if you work for the federal government, there's no consequences. You can do whatever you want, and you're covered by qualified immunity. No consequences for your actions. How crazy is that? How crazy is that our federal government has, and the people that are taking part in all this corruption, they're covered by qualified immunity. No wonder they do what they do. There's no consequences for their actions. It's basically, if you want to legally murder people, go work for the federal government. I hate to say it that way, but that's crazy. That's the reality of what we're facing. That's the reality of the situation. And that's what we're facing now. They're controlling the narrative. They're silencing all the people that are sharing the truth. They don't want the truth to be out. They don't want to present their evidence for proof of what they're saying, because what they're saying is a lie and deceitful, and it's all about covering everything up and silencing everybody so that the truth doesn't come out. Anyways, that's how I got involved. I love Ammon and Lisa Bundy. Before all of this started, I didn't know anybody else but them. And it was not uncommon in our community to see Ammon out on the side of the road helping someone. It was not uncommon in our community to see Ammon over at someone's house helping deliver a cow, or I guess you'd call it a calf. Helping deliver a calf. Ammon is a good person. His downfall, I guess, is that he cares. He's willing to sacrifice everything, including his own life and his own family, because he cares. Because it hurts him to watch the corruption, and because he can't stand by and watch and not do anything. That's his downfall. We need more Americans like him that care about this country, that care about their kids' future. And I mean, I know Ammon and Lisa Bundy from outside of all of this. They are a good family. They don't deserve, even the hired government informant, in his own words, Ammon doesn't deserve to be where he's at. Ammon is a good person. Ammon was set up. Those are the words from a hired federal employee. And I believe it. I know it. I know Ammon Bundy. He doesn't deserve to be where he's at. And anyways, before I end this video, I have gone on way too long. Angie Bundy, Brian's wife, will be taking the stand today in trial. I just ask everyone to please pray for her, that she'll be able to get the truth out without all the objections from the prosecution and the sustainings from the judge, that she'll be able to speak the truth and that the jury will hear and listen. And I will leave that. Thank you.